Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kid and Clouder Colouring Classes and welcome to our Spring Moments colouring class, markers and pencils. This class is a special Christmas gift for all of our community members in 2021 as a thank you for your support during this difficult time. We're going to be learning all of the basics for colouring skin, hair, folds, outfits, and we've got our sunflowers as well. Now, if you're coming here from YouTube, make sure you check out the full class at www.kidandclouder.com under the Classrooms tab for the accompanying booklet, free stamp that I'll be colouring here today, and all the colour blend charts for a big variety of markers and pencils brands that you can use. You can use any brand at all and even any colours at all as you colour her up today. The techniques don't change if the colours do because I'll be teaching you all the why and fundamentals behind what we're colouring rather than just a how-to. Now while you're on the website, make sure you check out other helpful spots such as our Colour Blend Charts tab for free colour blend charts between markers and pencils. We've got free classes, frequently asked colouring questions and answers, along with our extensive range of beginners classes for markers and pencils. All of our classes come with lifetime access to do at your own pace and free private tutoring to help you feel confident with your colouring. Our colouring classes at Kid and Clouder are all about teaching you real art fundamentals and breaking everything down to beginner basics. So, if you're new to colouring, this is going to be a great lesson for you to start learning how to create depth and dimension in your projects. And even if you've been colouring for a while, this is still going to be a great lesson to help explain some of the more intricate detailing and theories for you to help you level up. Just remember that a lesson is to help you grow, so we may be tackling some new techniques or information here today, which can feel a little bit challenging. This is actually a great thing. Whenever you're challenged, it means we've identified some areas that you can practice to help you level up. So a class should always push you. It shouldn't be super easy. You shouldn't nail it all every single time. And remember, as long as you have a go, you're growing and improving regardless of what your result looks like on the paper. Now, before we colour, one of the most important things that we need to learn about is called light source. Now, light source is anything in our scenes that create light. It's important because without light, we cannot see and objects don't have any depth or definition. Now, in our classes, we typically work with what's called ambient lighting, and this is usually a major source of light in a scene like the sun or overhead lights, and they cast big cones of light over your entire project rather than coming from, say, one side, as you may have seen in other videos before online. Ambient lighting is generally the most flattering form of light, and the way that we approach this is that any part of our image that is popping up toward us, imagine that it's popping up toward those rays of light that are coming down. So those raised up areas get hit by the rays of light first, making them the lightest and brightest parts of the object. And these are called our highlights. Now, the parts of the object that are slanting away or curving around and away from those light rays are darker, and we call these our formed shadows, because they're further from those light rays. Now, between highlight and our shadow, we have what's called the midtone, and this is generally considered the true color of the object because it's not affected by light or shade. Now, one more lighting theory that's very important to help you achieve depth is the cast shadow. Now, when we have something sitting in front or above something else, it casts a shadow on the object behind. So can you see that I'm holding the duster over my hand, and can you see the shadow that's on my hand? That's cast by the duster above. So the shadow is always on whatever object is below. Now, the closer these objects are, the darker and harder that shadow is. And as I start to space these objects out, my shadow gets softer and more dispersed and further away from this top object. So this is helping to show the levels in our project and helps each object to stand out against each other so they don't all blur in. Now, this may be new for some of you, and that's absolutely okay. It's not something we just know, it's something we have to learn, and it takes time to learn it. You're not going to learn everything about light source in 1, 2, or 10 lessons. The more topics and techniques you tackle, the more all of this starts to make sense. So it's really important just to put aside any feelings of overwhelm, and remember, we're just learning one little thing at a time. Even if you don't fully grasp it today, the next class you practice, it's going to get a little easier. This is why it's also really important to try topics that are outside of your usual go-to or comfort zone. This is when you'll learn the most about light source, your textures, color theories, and things that you wouldn't usually tackle with your same topics that you always go to. Even if you don't intend to color those topics ever again, you will always learn more when you push yourself out of that comfort zone. So don't ever feel nervous and don't ever discount the lessons that you may be taking away. All of you here doing this class today are doing this because you want to learn to grow your coloring. So take those steps, be brave, try new things, push yourself to go out of what's familiar, and this is how you're going to grow the quickest and the most effectively with your coloring. Okay, so now let's take a look at our image and we can talk about some of those light source theories for our first chapter. If you haven't done our classes before, the way that I tackle these is at the start of each chapter, I go through your art fundamentals and the why behind what we're doing here. Then what I do is I break down what we're coloring in both markers and pencils separately. So then you can fast forward to whatever part of the video has the medium that you'll be coloring. I annotate in real time as I color, so you'll always get the most tips by watching both parts of the video if you own both mediums. And it's really important not to skip the starting theory on the video. I know it can be a little boring sometimes to hear someone talk about those theories when all you want to do is color, but remember, this is an educational lesson here today. We don't just want to follow a quick tutorial and forget everything we've learned. It's really important to learn those underlying theories to help you continue to level up. Okay, so I'm going to be starting us off with our flower here today. Now, when we color flowers, one of the key things we want to keep in mind is that cast shadow that we talked about earlier. That's what helps each of the petals to stand out and have dimension. So when we have our flowers, each petal usually emanates from a center point. So you can see each of these petals here starts where that center is. Now, if I look closely to the flower, I can see there's basically a row of these petals all around, and then I can see here little petals popping out from underneath this main row. So what this says to me is that these little ones are underneath this first lot of petals. And remember, when something is underneath, the shadow is always on the object behind. So you'll notice here I've got this darker color straight underneath those petals that are in front. That's helping to show those levels so we can more clearly see that we have different rows of petals happening there. Now with these petals in the first row, sometimes they overlap like this. You can even see on my hand there that darker shadow where that overlapping line is. And so this is why we come in with the darker line where that overlap is between the petals, even in this first row. You'll also notice one more small detail, and that's on each of these petals here, I have this little line that goes about halfway through the center. I'm creating a crease in the petals. So what a crease is two sides that are slanting in and they meet in the middle. Now notice that between my hands you can see it's blocking the light and it looks a little darker in there. So when we have a crease, we show that by showing that darker color, which is further down from those light rays. So it's very small, but we can do it by just adding a small little line and then we blend that out to the side. And that helps to create that little bit of dimension in the actual petal itself. The center, we work on a little bit of texture. You'll notice that the edges are darker here and in the middle. So we're showing that these two edges here are further back. So it slants down, pops up toward us, and then goes back down in that middle area. We'll also do our leaves in this chapter. You can see here what I've got is my crease through the center, so that vein line through the leaf where we've got that little dip. You'll notice that it's a little lighter on the opposite side of that darker line. This helps those levels to really stand out, and it's called increasing the contrast of the colors there. By having this deep dark shadow and this brighter white highlight, it really helps those levels to stand out between the crease and the part that's popping up. darker details in the sides here, and I always look at the outline of the object to help me with where to place any of those shadow details. So for example here, notice this dip in the outline. It's extending in toward the middle of the leaf. So we can think of that outline as being pulled in toward the center. We wouldn't have that dip in the outline without something happening on the interior of the leaf. So make sure you always think about pulling that detail in. So we can use that in each of these sections to add in that little bit of extra detail. Alright, so that's some underlying theory to help us get started. Now as we get colouring, it's all going to make a lot more sense as well. So let's just go ahead and jump in. I'll be starting with my pencils first, or if you're using markers, you can fast forward to the next part where we go through with our markers. Welcome to the pencils portion of the video tutorial. I recommend that you watch the start of this video first, as I've already gone through some of the underlying art fundamentals and foundations that we're going to be using to colour up our sunflower. Please don't skip any of the theory parts of the video. These are really important because it's an educational lesson to help you learn all those art foundations so you can apply these to all different images after the class. Alright. Before we get started, I'm just going to run you through some pencil blending basics that you can try before you come to this finished image. Even if you've seen this before, I do still recommend to watch again just to help you with those fundamentals to feel more confident. So when we colour with our pencils, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is paper. So it's really important that we have a good drawing paper when we're colouring with the pencils. Drawing paper generally has what we call a tooth. So tooth is like a printed texture into the paper, and that texture grips and holds the pigment. That's what allows you to layer and blend up, so you're getting complex blends, and allows you to keep the colours smooth. Now, the paper that I'm using here today is Mitont by Canson. There are many different brands that are available. We do have a big write-up on those on our website as well. You can head to kitandclouder.com, click FAQs, then colouring FAQs, and you'll see papers there. Now the paper I'm using, if you're using the same one I am today, please make sure that you're using the right side. This is one of the only dual-sided papers on the market. So you may feel that your paper is dual-sided because it's got a texture side and the other side smooth, but that's not actually dual-sided. It's only just been printed on one side and the rest is just the standard paper. Whereas this one has two different textures. So the side I'm printing on is a little bit softer. The other side, the way you can tell, is this side here. Notice it's got these little bumps all over there, like little circles. We call that the honeycomb print. Now that's for holding chalks and pastels and more heavy media like this. So we tend not to use this side. It takes a lot longer to blend out because the tooth is bigger to hold that different type of material. So I'm using the reverse side here. So if you are using the Mitont paper, just make sure you've got it on that right side. If you're using a different drawing paper, you'll want that textured side so you can grip the pigment. Now, if you are using a smooth paper here today, that's okay. It's all practice, and you're still going to be going over the techniques, and it's still going to help you learn. But it's going to be a little harder to blend smooth. Your key here today is to go really slow and really soft as you build up the colors. That's going to help you gain a little bit more control. So no matter what paper you're using though, pencil work is all about going slow and soft with the blending. It's important to always keep your pencils nice and sharp. That gives you control and allows you to push the pigment down the page. And it's all about blending in really little soft layers. So we just build the pencil up over and over with multiple layers and strokes. And you can see the more layers I add, it grips into the paper and I'm slowly flattening that paper down. It's really important as you're blending though to be aware of the size of your strokes. If you're finding it hard to blend your paper smooth, if you're new to using paper with a tooth, it's probably because your strokes are too big at this point. So we want to make sure our strokes are only really small, and I even like to use small circles to push the paper flat as I blend. Keeping that pencil sharp really does help with that as well. Now, instead of coming in with a hard texture and pressing it all flat straight away, the reason why we go soft is it allows us to build up those blends. So if I come in here nice and softly with one color, you can see I'm not placing any pressure down, but then I'm able to come back over with the next color and continue to blend out. Notice I've got no lines between my colors here. And then it's all about going back, building up the layers so you've got the control. Obviously we use a few more colors in this here today, but you can see the idea. I'm slowly filling in the tooth, having control over my blend and getting those transitions nice and flat. Now what you may find when you're starting out with pencils, it's normal to be a little heavy-handed. Now I'll just show you what happens if we're a little bit too heavy-handed. If we come in here and we lay down our color, notice how my color is ending in a straight hard line there. Now as I come over to blend, what happens? You can see that line in between the colors. I haven't blended them smooth. That's because there was just too much pressure and I flattened down the tooth and the page too quickly. That means that there's no grip left for any more pigment, so I wasn't able to get that smooth. That's why we want to always focus on going nice and slow and soft so we do have that control over the duration of the blend. However, here's a little trick to help today. This is one that I have made up called fuzzying up the edge, technical term. So if you come in and you're a little heavy-handed and you find you've got that line, it's not ruined. What I want you to do to focus on here is come back in really nice and slow and soft and come back over your edges here to fade them out. And I just go over the top to soften down. You can hold the pencil further back as well. That'll allow you to place less pressure on the pencil. And then once you've flattened that down, just make sure that the next color you come in with is nice and soft. And then you should be able to come back here, nice small little circles to blend. And you can see we're able to get those transitions smoother. So that's a good little tip to keep in mind today as you blend. Going back over, fuzzing up any edges that look a little bit too hard, but making sure overall that you're patient with your pencil coloring. It's about slow, soft layers for control. It's not a race to finish here today. Enjoy being in the moment to create that finished piece. Now one last thing before we jump in, one tool that I'm going to be using here today that you're going to see is our Kit and Clatter pencil dusters. Now, every so often, you're going to see me just wiping the page off like this, removing any of the dust that falls from my pencil. Now, the reason why this is important is if you're not constantly removing those little bits of pigment that are falling off, you can accidentally push them down into the page and smudge the pigment in. It'll give you a dirty look and you'll get little speckles all over your coloring. So you can use many different things to do this. I used to use a feather because it was really soft, like a little emu or ostrich feather, and just brush away the pigment with this. The problem that I had with them is they kept breaking all over our page. So what I actually did when a lot of people requested what to use, I actually had these dusters made up for us. So I've actually picked the bristles that we use on these, so they are super, super soft. They're softer than most of the art brushes and makeup brushes that are out there as well, to make sure that you're not pushing the pigment down, because you do have to be careful when you're brushing away that you're not using force, which is encouraging that pigment to grip into the tooth of the paper. But you can use whatever you have on hand, just be really gentle. Welcome back, and it's time to go ahead and get coloring on our sunflower. I'm going to start us off here today with a little bit of burnt ochre, and we're going to map in all of our shadows first. So grab your burnt ochre, and I want you to apply this really lightly between the petals. So you can see what's in front and what's behind, essentially by tracing a petal. So you can see here I added a shadow on the side. If I follow this petal, I can see it starts here and comes around and extends the whole way back to the center point. There's nothing in front of this line here, although we do have an intersection at this point. Because the line I'm following is uninterrupted, I can assume that this line is going in front of this line here. This line here just stops. So think about what's actually happening. It wouldn't just stop in real life. What's happening is that petal is going back underneath and connecting to that center, but it's under the petal here that I was tracing. So remember, if you ever get confused, place your pencil over your hand and remind yourself what's behind is what gets the shadow. So we just come straight through and apply that shadow on the part that's behind. And I can just go through and start adding in all of these shadows on the parts that are behind. Now with pencils, the key is to go nice and soft and build up your color slowly. Remember, paper is really important with your pencils as well. We want to try and avoid working on anything smooth. When we work on smooth paper, it actually impacts your ability to layer up the pencil and get those complex color blends. This is when you'll find as well that you often have lines in between your colors as you blend. It's not anything you're doing, it's that the paper is not holding all those layers of pigment. Often people can find it hard to color on paper with texture, and that texture is called a tooth. And usually, this isn't actually the paper's fault, it's just the way that the blending may be occurring. People often don't like the little white speckles that show through. These are really important because this is what the tooth actually is, and what's holding the layers of pigment of your pencil. We need those white speckles to really build up the color and to get everything smooth. The way you flatten them is by coming through with extra layers of color and smaller strokes to have control over this. We'll talk about that as we get blending out. It's really important that you don't press down too hard and try and get rid of those white speckles early on. We actually need them to help us get the smoothest and most vibrant blend. Now from here, I'm going to come through to all the bigger petals and I'm going to add a line just extending about halfway down. On these little ones where it's cut through and you don't see the other side of the petal, you can just leave that out. So you can always do however much detail is comfortable for you. Remember, you're the only one that knows what my project looks like. It doesn't matter if yours has a variation to it. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, just different. Again, make sure that you're applying this nice and soft. And back to what I was saying before about paper, if you do only have smooth paper today, it's absolutely okay to still practice the techniques, but make sure that you go really, really soft as you build up your layers. And make sure that you also adjust your expectation as well. Please don't get frustrated that yours may not be as smooth or as vibrant as mine, because it's not anything you're doing wrong, it's just that you're working on a different medium than I am. Alright, now once you've used that burnt ochre, we can start to blend out with goldenrod. I'm going to come through and apply straight over my cast shadows and begin to blend out a little further. Now where I have these little detail lines, I'm going to come over the top and I'm blending toward the top of my flower here. Again, take your time and apply the color softly. Now, as I come into the other side of the petal, I'm going to change the direction that I blend these lines out. Again, I'm blending out toward the top. But now it's just on the other side as these petals are facing a different direction. Again, change the direction at the bottom as well. Alright, next color that I'm going to use is a little bit of sunburst yellow, and I'm just continuing to blend out. So I just come straight over the previous and just extend a little further. Make sure that you're not extending too far. We want to make sure we've got room for each of the colors in our blend. Now, how much or how little of each color you use impacts how dark or light the blend is going to become, or how yellow versus how orange. There's no right or wrong way for this. Remember, nature is always a little different. So if yours is a little darker than mine or a little lighter, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Again, just different. But this is called adjusting the value of the color blend. Value is how light or dark the blend is, and we can control it by how much or how little of each color we use. That's a really important skill to learn. Okay, now once you've used the sunburst yellow, we swap into our canary yellow. Now this is our nice light and bright color. We come over the previous and extend out. I'm also going to blend up the other side of the petal. If you can leave a little bit of white just before you hit that crease line, please do. If you don't quite get there today, it's just something to work on for next time. But notice how this color being a lot brighter, as we apply it over the previous, it just really pops and stands out, making the blend appear a lot more vibrant. Now, most of my tooth is actually flattened down because of how small my area is here. What I can do to help with some of those areas that aren't quite blended is I grab my white pencil and I'm just going to apply it in the remaining white area. That just helps to flatten and bring those colors together where your very highlight was. And we can even come through and repeat everything again to further build up the depth. And this is what helps us flatten the tooth. Now make sure your pencils are nice and sharp, as this will give you that control. Start again with your burnt ochre, and we just apply right where we laid this color initially. Now it's really important when you do a second round of the blend that you aren't using more pressure to apply the color. We don't blend with more pressure. We blend with a light pressure and a smaller stroke. The smaller stroke will help you get into that tooth of the paper. So just take your time. We want nice and small and controlled. Next color is goldenrod. Straight over the top and extend a little further out. Sunburst yellow is next. And canary yellow. Now with this layer, your pencils and your blending should be fairly smooth. Now, if it's not smooth, so you've got two things which may have happened. You may have a lot of strong lines between your colors, and this may mean that you pressed too hard, and right now the pigment is very harsh on the paper. So what you need to focus on is just softening that grip a little more. You shouldn't be holding the pencil so hard that it's hurting your fingers. This is too much. So you want to ease back a little. Now, if you get to the end of this and you still have white speckles everywhere and the color is super, super light, you're not using enough pressure. It shouldn't be taking you, say, 6 layers to color what we're doing in 2. It's normal, though, when you start that you may have more or less layers than what I'm doing because you're still getting used to that pencil control. But if it's taking you a huge amount longer to color, it's time for you to focus on increasing that pressure. Don't be nervous of it. Remember, small strokes and just like a writing pressure would be the best way to describe it. But I see people on both sides of the spectrum, and both are very hesitant to change how they color. And I guess the one that I worry about the most is the person who's taking like 10 layers to color something, because all of a sudden it goes from being like a 1 hour project to like a 10-hour project. Or if we've got a 3-hour project, it's like a 30-hour project. So you can see why it's important to start adjusting our pressure on the blend and adjusting how we do that blend. So it's not just dragging out and becoming unenjoyable as well. All right, so let's go ahead and do the center. Now we're going to work on a little bit of texture. So I've got my dark brown. I'm going to first come along the edge of the center here. And then I'm going to do like a circle through the middle. Now what I'm going to do is just dab the pencil. So I'm lifting it up and dabbing it the whole way through that center area. And I'm going to do the same in the middle here. I'm going to try and leave a little bit of white in the very center though. All right. The next color that I'm going to be using is burnt ochre. And I'm just going to dab straight over the top of the previous and extend further in. And the same through that middle part as well. And then my goldenrod. And the same thing, I'm basically just dabbing through that center part. So it's dabbing, I'm not blending. I'm lifting the pencil up so I have variation and texture that's visible. I want to repeat the previous steps as well, so I build up more depth on my paper. So I'm just dabbing my dark brown. And lifting the pencil after you do the dabs, it leaves space between the strokes. That's how the texture is visible. It's actually the spaces between the strokes that makes it stand out, not the strokes themselves. Burnt ochre is next. And then goldenrod. All right, now from here, we're just going to finish up the sunflower by doing the leaves. So I'm going to start with a little bit of dark green. Let's come up to the top. I'm going to draw a line through where that vein is, and I'm going to apply it to the side that's closest to the top of the page. So we go above the vein line in the middle, and then through the bottom of the leaf. Same on this side as well. Now we do have some cast shadows to think about, so come around the hand because that's in front. And around the bottom. Now remember we talked about where we have those dips in from the side, we want to add a little bit of detail to show that texture and shading as well. So I'm just doing a little bit of shading where those dips are. on the stem, come underneath the hand. I'm going to try and apply colour to both sides here. Because think of it like a cylindrical object. The middle pops out toward us, the sides curve away from the light. This is really important too when you colour characters. I always see people colour legs one side light, one side dark, but legs and arms are cylinders. So both sides will actually be darker to make the middle look like it's popping out towards you. Alright, let's blend these out. The next colour I'm going to use is grass green. I come straight over what I did with the dark green and I extend a little further out. It's time to fill that space. Apple green, we're doing the same thing. You can see once you really add in all of the shading for your light source, it gets a lot easier because you're basically just working with that template and blending out each of your shadows. And spring green. Now as you blend this lightest color up, try and leave a little touch of white just before you hit that line. It's only a really small amount. Now I'm going to pop in with my white pencil and I'm going to apply where that white line is and just back and over where the green has ended. This will just help the white to fade in with some of that green so the transition is a little smoother. Now at this point you can see I've got fairly good color coverage, but I've got lots of white speckles showing through. Now there's two things I can do here. I can repeat the extra steps to build up that pigment again and flatten it all down. Remember, you want smaller strokes to help blend out. Or what we can do is use our colorless blender pencil. Now I wanted to bring this up because this is a really helpful tool. All different brands make these. So it's essentially the core of the pencil you're using but there's no color in the end, no pigment. So what this does is it will help to push around the pigment that's already on the page. Now what I've said there is very, very important because it's not going to add any pigment. So if I just show you at the bottom here, I've got really, really light coloring like this. It's probably not the best color to show you. Let me show you with like a darker color. If I've got a really, really light layer, as I come through and try and use my blender, it doesn't blend very well. Notice that I don't have very good coverage and I still have white speckles. You need to make sure that this is built up fairly well, but you still might have those white speckles, but notice how much more vibrant it is and we have a lot less of the speckles. So as I use my blender, that actually gets in and finishes it off. Now, because you're pushing around pigment that's on the paper, it can result in a blend that's not as smooth. So I wouldn't use this on everything. Be selective about it. Use it on things that have texture. I find it's helpful for hair, nature, but I wouldn't use it on like skin or an outfit, for example, that I want to be really crisp and smooth. But for our leaves, we could absolutely come through and apply this. I start in my shadow and then I blend out toward my highlight because we're pushing the pigment toward the lightest area. So only use this if you're happy with the level of pigment on the page. If it's still quite light, come through and repeat again first with another layer. This is just basically helping you to speed up the blending process and it saves using your pencils. Now you'll notice that I don't use Gamsol when I color. Gamsol is actually fairly new medium for crafters to use. It's not something that a lot of artists use unless it's for really large areas like backgrounds because it's the same thing as this here. What Gamsol does is it's a solvent that breaks down the pigment into the pencil into like a paint-like surface. The problem with this is we can lose control over the blend, over the colors, over the smoothness, and over the detail. So it does flatten everything down, but you compromise on a lot. So traditionally, artists would use it for big areas like blending out a big background so it looks smooth, not for like things like this that we're doing now. It's not to say you can't use it, but you'll always get the most vibrant and the most control and detailed approach when you use just the pencils themselves. So this is why I don't usually teach it, but you may see some crafters doing this technique just because sometimes they're not utilizing things like light source or added detail, etc. so to its full extent. So they're not really, I guess, worrying about those smaller things. But I mean, all of you here wanting to learn to color, we really want to learn how to create details ourselves. That's where the joy in coloring comes from, is having that little bit of ownership. But again, absolutely zero disrespect at all to anyone who loves using Gamsol. Go for it. If that's your preferred thing and you love it, absolutely you can do it. Exact same technique as we've used now, but instead of using like that blender pencil or doing extra layers of pigment, you can just come in with the Gamsol and apply it now to smooth down. Just keep in mind though that again, it does compromise a little bit of that detail and a little bit of that color vibrancy, so your result may look different to mine at the end. But that is actually our first chapter all finished up. And you can see, even in just coloring the small flower, we've learnt so much about light source and color theory already, and how you can use these techniques to apply to all different images after class. Now, remember, this is your first time trying this technique, and when we try new things, we can often have mistakes in areas we don't love. It's totally normal. Before looking at your work, I want you to do something really important, and that's change your perspective. When we're coloring, we color from about 10 or 20 centimeters away. We color so up close, focusing on every single little detail, every mistake, every single little aspect. But that's not actually how coloring is viewed. Think about whenever you're online, you see someone else's work. Do you sit so close and scrutinize looking for mistakes? No, you look at the whole thing, you appreciate it in entirety, how the techniques have come together. That's what we want to do here as well. So to help you change your perspective, what I would encourage you to do is hop up out of your chair, do some hand stretches, just open and close your hands a few times, make sure you're not getting any RSI from holding those pencils, neck gently from side to side, and even do a lap walking around the room just to loosen up. Then when you come back, hold your colouring out at arm's distance or prop it up against the wall and take a few steps back. You're changing that perspective, viewing it as a whole and seeing how it's coming together. Make sure you do those things so you actually get up and do your stretches. It helps so much rather than just holding it back and looking. So when you're looking at your whole piece, remember if there's areas you don't love, instead of saying I've done this wrong or it's not perfect, really don't like when people say that. Try and always avoid it, especially if you're sharing online as well. What I want you to do instead is look at your piece and say, any areas you don't love, think of the lesson here. Next time I'm going to do this to get this result. And see, all of a sudden you change negative into positive into constructive. It's your learning opportunity, and that's exactly what we're here to do today. So experiment, have fun with it. You're doing a great job. I'm really excited to see how you're going. Pop in and share your coloring after this step with us. Pop it in our Facebook group, pop it on Instagram, your blogs, any other group. You're welcome to share any way you like. All I love is that you please just mention that you're learning at Kit and Clouder so others can come and learn with us as well. I'd love if you mention what class it is. But you are working hard. You are challenging yourself. You're pushing yourself. That deserves to be celebrated. So again, give yourself a big pat on the back. You've done the most important thing to help you grow your coloring here today. Alright, welcome to the markers portion of the video tutorial. Now you should have watched the start of this video where I go through all the art foundations and theories that we're going to be using to colour up this chapter. Please don't skip this part of the video. I know it can be a little boring to hear someone talk about those theories, but it's one of the most important parts of colouring because you don't just want to follow a how-to. You really want to learn the why behind what you're doing here today, as this is what helps you to colour all different images after class. Now before we jump in, I'm going to go ahead and show you just a markers blending basics video, just to help you with the foundations before you come to colour this image. Even if you've seen this video before, I do still highly recommend to watch again as you'll get more tips on how to do your blending before we come to the finished result. Okay, now with markers, I'm using my Copics here today. Now it's important when using alcohol markers that you use a good bleed-proof cardstock. Now I'm using Express It blending card. There are a few other types available as well, which you can find on the website, kitandclouder.com. Click FAQs, then Colouring FAQs, then you'll see the papers section with suggestions there. Now the reason why we use a bleed-proof cardstock is it allows the ink to sit on the surface of the paper for longer rather than seeping through those fibers of the paper. This is what allows us to blend the colours together and allows us to work them a bit more. The reason why I like the Express It is I find it tends to hold more layers of ink for longer, allowing the ink to sort of sit on the surface for a bit longer. Now, if you're brand new to using markers, what I would suggest, if you have difficulty with any of the strokes here today, that you pop onto our website, again, kitandclouder.com, click Classrooms at the top of the page, and then scroll down to the free Markers 101 class. Now, this class runs through all of your marker fundamentals. Okay, so you can use any colours at all if you like. If you're going to colour along with me, I'm just using my B12, 14 and 16, so a good blend to show highlight, midtone and shadow. Now when we do a colouring with our markers, the main stroke that we're going to use is feathering. So I don't really use circle blending in our classes, and that's because if you've learnt circle blending before, what happens is if you've got your dark, middle and light colours and you're circling, you can actually muddy everything up. So when we work with light source, I tend to use more feathering method. Now feathering is when we'll come parallel with the page. Now I'm holding the marker like I just would normal writing, so it's a little bit on its side rather than straight up and down. Now you may notice I'm holding the marker so it rests on my second last finger. A lot of people colour with it on the last one, and when you colour on the last one, what you'll notice here is I'm very close to the page. So as soon as I put my hand down, I'm sort of hitting the page already, whereas if I've got it on my second one here, when I come down to place the marker, I've got a bit more of a gap. My marker's sitting high from the page and I have a bit more control. Now, if you usually color like this, you may find that it just takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable in this one. You may find it doesn't work for you at all, and that's okay. But I have had a lot of feedback that it's helped with fine lines. So have a practice today, see how you go, and maybe something that helps. So when we do the feathering, we're going to come parallel with the page and we lift our wrist at the end of the stroke. And that gives me a nice fine finish to help with blending. I want to use the side of the marker so I get nice big broad coverage. And you can see I'm overlapping so I get, again, that broad coverage there. I'm trying not to have much individual stroke like this showing at the end. So you can see here I've got pretty good coverage and just lifting as I finish up. Then I grab my next lightest color, so this is B14 for me, and I start just back of where I've ended with that color. And then I just do the same thing, so I feather straight over the top and extend further out. And I keep going until I can't see the line between the colors any further. Now I can see, however, the line of where I started this color. So once I've finished this, I just go back real quick. One layer should get rid of that line. So the idea with markers is that you keep blending until the lines disappear, and that's what your bleed-proof cardstock helps with. So next color, B12, same thing, you just start back a little bit, building up, and remember, use the side of that marker, nice big broad strokes. Keep going until that line disappears. When it does, if you can see where you started the color, just go back one nice stroke over the top until you're happy with the blend through. And that's all there is to it. So you want to make sure we're not getting these little stubby sort of strokes here. If you are, use a bit more the side. And try and work quickly. I find when we work quickly and we're a little bit more carefree, it's a lot easier to blend with the markers. We're not as heavy-handed. We don't need to think it through. Alright, welcome back. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Now I'm going to be starting on our sunflower. Now, some of the strokes here are smaller if you printed the image at the size that I'm particularly using. Great thing about digital stamps is you can make them any size at all, but the only way to get better at coloring smaller images is to color smaller images. And sometimes you're just going to not love what you create while you're still learning that marker control if you're brand new to coloring. Now, a couple of tips. I know you just watched the video on all the foundations, but I just wanted to show you a couple of tips extra. Now, when we color fine lines, the super brush nib here is always going to be the finest line if you're using Copic markers. That's because it's the only brush tip to go to a point instead of a circumference. So even if you have like those little bullet fine nibs, they're never going to be as fine with practice. You want to hold the marker close to the nib and hold it upright. Now, rather than if you were writing, which is when we tend to push down to the page, think about just gliding the nib along the surface of the paper. So you're just barely touching and grazing. This is how we color with markers. It's just super, super light and soft. You'll notice I've rested the marker on my second last finger. Some people use the last finger like this. Now with this, as you go to lower your hand to the page, you push the marker into it straight away. Whereas if we raise it up, as we lower our hand to the page, I don't actually touch the marker to the page. So I have full control to lower it as light as I want to just graze along the surface. Now this might not work for everyone, but I know a lot of people have really said it's helped them. So maybe have a little bit of a think about how you're holding that marker as well. Try to speed yourself up as you color. I find when we're concentrating, I see a lot of people do this. And they're super slow and they take their time and the lines end up a lot thicker. When you're working quickly, you've got less time to think it through and the lines will often come out a lot softer. Alright, so let's go ahead and have a go at this one. So using our E35, let's apply this as a shadow between the petals. Now you can determine what's in front and what's behind simply by tracing along the petal. So if I start here, I can pick any petal to begin with, and notice I can just trace along the line, and then I hit an intersection point. Now I know my line wouldn't just stop in real life, so what's actually happening? That line is probably continuing along underneath and connecting back to the center. Now because that part is underneath this petal here, we know whatever is behind is what gets the shadow on it. So using my E35, I can draw in my shadow line. And you can just go ahead and add in all of these shadows to the petals that are behind in this way. Now your lines don't need to be super duper fine. A little thickness is always going to be easier to blend out. But just do your best with this step. Try and work quickly, and remember, it's not about pushing down as if you were writing, but just about really softly grazing the marker against the paper. I do make it look easy because I've got a lot of experience. The more practice you do, the more experience you get, and the more control you get. So try not to take the cheats way out and always make it bigger. I find when people do this, they never really master the smaller images because they're just not getting the practice on them. Now you can skip the next step if you're starting with markers. You don't need to add the detail lines on the petals because this is even smaller. So you can just leave it there for the time being. If you are leaving it there, what I would recommend is that you add a little shading along the base here so that we have something to blend within the petal. If you are a little bit more comfy with fine lines, what I want you to do is to create your fold line through the center. And we're going to take that about halfway. So just do whatever you're comfortable with at this point. It's just on the petals that are in front as well. We're not really seeing a lot of those petals behind, so we don't really need to add all of that extra detail. Okay, now once you've done that, we can start to blend out. The next color I'm going to use is Y38, and this is going to tone our brown color. So I'm going to bring it over the top. You can blend out your cast shadows, and whenever we have these fold lines, blend to the top of the page. So I'm going to go over the top and blend toward the top here. Now as you carry around, the direction that you're shading may change just based on the orientation of the petals. Now let's talk about color theory pretty quickly. So you'll notice that for my darkest color, I used a mid-brown, even though our sunflower is technically more of a yellow or a golden yellow sort of color. When we color with yellows and oranges, typically these colors don't actually hold a lot of depth. So we find as we blend out, we lose those shadows or the fold lines. Using a mid-brown with your yellows and oranges can really help you achieve a little bit more depth in the blend. Yellow that I use, the E35. E35s are more of like a yellow-based brown as well, so they'll tone out really nicely with the oranges I'm using and the yellows. Next color is Y35. Now if you just did a little bit of a dab at the center, you're just blending that out toward the tip of the petal. That way you're getting a little bit of variation in each one without worrying about fine lines. If you have been working on your fine lines in the middle though, continue to blend these toward the top of the page. I'm doing multiple strokes to soften out the line between my colors as I work. Don't worry if it feels a little messy, it's always normal at the halfway point. We really need to finish each element before we see how it comes together. Now if yours is looking darker than mine, that's absolutely okay. Flowers come in a big variety of colors. How much or how little of each color you use determines what's called the value of the blend. Now value is how light or dark our color blend is. So if we're using more of the darker colors, we're going to get a darker value overall. Again, doesn't mean that it's wrong, it's just going to be a little different. And my final color is my Y11. I'm bringing this the whole way back and then to that highlight. Now if you can, try and leave a really small slither of white just before you get to that center point. That's more of an advanced tip, so just depending on the level you're at, you can work toward that. Remember, we've all been coloring for different amounts of time, so some people are going to be focusing on just getting a smooth blend. Others are going to be focusing on how to get a finer line. Others are going to be focusing on really getting that light source and starting to think about things like adding those little pops of white. So you're all going to take away something different here today based on how long you've been coloring. Your coloring doesn't need to look like mine or anyone else's for you to have learned a lot of new techniques and to be doing a good job. So just remember that the final object in front of you is just yours that you've been learning, playing, and troubleshooting with here today. Now with markers, I always like to do a second round of the blend because the first time around, we can desaturate our colors. So think about how alcohol markers blend. You essentially are laying down a darker pigmented alcohol on the page, and you're blending by diluting that darker colored alcohol with a lighter colored alcohol. We have the blender marker. Now, blender marker, we don't use the blender marker for blending in this sort of industry because that's just the alcohol component of the marker. You can imagine if you're adding like straight alcohol to your alcohol ink, it is going to dilute it down. So essentially it is blending, but it's going to be a harsh blend because instead of stepping through each color and gradually getting lighter, you're trying to just dilute down what's already there, which is going to be quite harsh, and it doesn't always look very nice and smooth. This is why the blender is great for mistakes, because you're essentially diluting down the alcohol that's already there, trying to remove it. But we blend with each color getting lighter in increments so it gets smoother. So to add back that little bit of depth that we may have lost through that desaturation, we can repeat everything. Now, my E35 still looks fairly strong, so I'm going to leave that and not repeat the E35. I'm going to start from the Y38, just going over where I laid that initially and extending further out. I'm taking my time to do multiple strokes so I can blend out my lines. Next color is Y35, and let's continue to blend that out. You'll notice that the color should be a little bit more vibrant this time. The lines may even look a little more blended as well. And then Y11 to finish up. Alright, now to do the center, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab E49 and we're just going to dab along that outer edge of the center. It's just a little messy. I've got lots of little dabs close together. And then I'm going to dab in the middle as well, create like a circle, leave a little bit of white in the middle. Then from there, I'm going to do dabs that are spaced out. So I'm lifting my marker and placing it down in a new position. So I get little bits of white in between my dabs. This is how we see texture. The next color I'm going to use now is a little bit of E47. And I'm just going to do the same thing, just dabbing that color through. Space it out, so don't have them all close together. We want those little bits of white so the texture is nice and visible. And the next color I'm going to add in is a little bit of Y38. Add a little bit of that like orangey kind of look to that center as well. And leaving that middle part there just white. You can of course repeat anything as well if you want to build up a little bit of extra depth. I've got my E47. Just taking my time to space out the dabs so I have that texture. Alright, now let's go ahead and color up our leaves. So I'm going to be using a nice vibrant green blend here today. I'm going to start with my G28 and we'll start by applying through that vein line in the center. We're going to blend that up toward the top of the page. So I'm coming straight through that middle part, and I'm also going to come along the bottom edge here as well. I'm going to do a cast shadow around my flower because that's in front. Now again, add a bit of thickness to your lines. It's going to be easier to actually blend those out. Cast shadow under the hand as I come into the next leaf, going to come above that vein line. Now remember, we talked at the start of this video about where we have the little dips in the outlines and using them to add a little bit of detail and shading. So you can see I'm doing just some rough blending. It's almost like a little triangular in nature as well. And we've got the big one here, same thing, come through that center line, and then let's look for any bumps in that outer edge, creating a detail. So it's not a lot of color at the moment, it's just getting that sort of started. Coming down to the bottom, I just do like a little circle at the base and I extend my color down both sides of the stem. If you're not comfortable with fine lines, just bring it down one side of the stem. Again, we're just adjusting the detail until you feel a little bit more comfortable. Now once you've done that, we can start to blend out. My next color is G07. I come straight over the top of that middle line and extend toward the top of the paper. And the same at the bottom, come over that line and extend toward the top of the paper. And then I'm just carrying that through in each little section. Come over your details that you've added, extend a little further out. It always looks a little bit funny at the halfway point, so don't worry if you feel like it's a little messy. It's totally normal. Let's keep blending out. We've got YG25 next. Straight over the top, multiple strokes, and start to blend out those lines. You're getting closer to the middle of the leaf there now. And notice I'm doing multiple strokes back and forth, blending out the line of the color underneath. So if you still have a line between your colors, you may need to do a couple more strokes to get that smooth. And don't worry though, the second round of the blend always makes that easier too. So you can always repeat everything to build up the color a little more to help it look smoother. And then YG25. Now if you can, leave that tiny little amount of white before you hit that center vein line. Now you can absolutely come back and repeat everything again if you want to build up that little bit of extra depth, but that's actually a sunflower all done. Now remember, this is your first time trying this technique, and when we try new things, we can often have mistakes in areas we don't love. It's totally normal. Before looking at your work, I want you to do something really important, and that's change your perspective. When we're coloring, we color from about 10 or 20 centimeters away. We color so up close, focusing on every single little detail, every mistake, every single little aspect. But that's not actually how coloring is viewed. Think about whenever you're online, you see someone else's work. Do you sit so close and scrutinize looking for mistakes? No, you look at the whole thing. You appreciate it in entirety, how the techniques have come together. That's what we want to do here as well. So to help you change your perspective, what I would encourage you to do is hop up out of your chair, do some hand stretches, just open and close your hands a few times. Make sure you're not getting any RSI from holding those pencils. Neck gently from side to side, and even do a lap walking around the room just to loosen up. Then when you come back, hold your coloring out at arm's distance or prop it up against the wall and take a few steps back. You're changing that perspective, viewing it as a whole and seeing how it's coming together. Make sure you do those things so you actually get up and do your stretches. It helps so much rather than just holding it back and looking. So when you're looking at your whole piece, remember if there's areas you don't love, instead of saying I've done this wrong or it's not perfect, really don't like when people say that. Try and always avoid it, especially if you're sharing online as well. What I want you to do instead is look at your piece and say, any areas you don't love, think of the lesson here. Next time I'm going to do this to get this result. And see, all of a sudden you change negative into positive into constructive. It's your learning opportunity, and that's exactly what we're here to do today. So experiment, have fun with it. You're doing a great job. I'm really excited to see how you're going. Pop in and share your coloring after this step with us. Pop it in our Facebook group, pop it on Instagram, your blogs, any other group. You're welcome to share any way you like. All I love is that you please just mention that you're learning at Kit and Clouder so others can come and learn with us as well. I'd love if you mention what class it is. But you are working hard. You are challenging yourself. You're pushing yourself. That deserves to be celebrated. So again, give yourself a big pat on the back. You've done the most important thing to help you grow your coloring here today. Welcome to the next chapter of the video tutorial. And in this chapter, we're going to be looking at the skin and hair. Now for our skin tone today, we're looking at an olive complexion today. So there's a whole bunch of different colors you can use for skin. Always experiment. In our classes, I do often like to stick to like a standard skin blend for a lighter and a darker option, just to help you get that practice up, because it is a little trickier to color skin, and I think it's often because of the expectation we have of what it should look like. So getting comfortable with the basics first really helps before branching out. However, we don't have a lot of detail here on our character today, so I thought, why not let's play with some other color tones. Don't forget you can find a full list of different color options as well on our website at kitandclouder.com under the color blends tab. There's a bunch of skin tones there for you too. So in this one here today, when we're coloring the skin, it's really important to keep in mind that we use multiple colors to create skin tones. So we still need all of that light and shade. Typically, I see people using only one or two colors, and often they're very similar in value together. So remember, value is how light or dark a color blend is. And what happens is our skin tone tends to look pretty washed out compared to all the beautiful depths you're creating in the rest of the image. So don't be afraid of the darker colors when you color skin tone. So we need to have that contrast between light and shade in order to show that the skin is still affected by the light. So, I mean, I'm pretty pale, as you can see, but if I hold something over my hand, see how dark that shadow is? So I'll even get people say to me, oh, but what color do I use for a baby? A baby still is impacted by shadows. It may not be tanned, like I'm not tanned either, but you can see we're still affected by shadows. It doesn't just stay light. We need the consistency to help it look more realistic. So on our girl here, you'll notice things like here, the hat sits over the face. So the hat is casting a shadow. So we need that darker area straight underneath, contrasting against the lighter part of the main face to really show that variation, to show the levels, to show what's happening. We're really keeping out any facial details here just so it's quite generic, but we'll come down into the arms and you'll notice with our arms, shading occurs to both sides. Think of the arms as like cylinders. The middle pops up toward us with the sides curving around and away from the light. So sides are always darker. We want to think about things like cast shadows here too. When you've got the hand, you've got the parts of the hand that are below the fingers. And because that is so far back, it ends up looking a lot darker. Your lightest color is not your main color. That's also something really important to think about. I often will see people do like a dark shadow around the side of the face or on where they think the shadows are on the legs and the arms, and then the rest is all light. Your lightest color should be reserved for the part of the object that's popping up the highest. Your mid color, and usually if you want like a fairer complexion, I'd say like your second color will be your main color. So this color here, more of your mid-tone, more of the true color of the object, but you need a shade lighter to show the absolute highest points. Otherwise, all you're saying is that every single part of the face is all flat at that highest point. So this video, again, we're not really getting into all the contouring here. We've got a lot of classes that focus on that on our website if you do want to learn more. But it's important to start getting out of that comfort zone and sticking with those lighter colors, especially because the main thing I hear from people is that they want to learn that depth in that coloring. And this is how we really do it, is start implementing those darker tones so we can focus on where that light source is. Now in the hair, you can see we've got a really nice wave happening here. Now the way that we can think about this is we want to break the hair up into sections. So firstly, rather than just having one big mass of hair, we think about what's in front versus what's behind. So for example, over here, we can see that this whole section is sitting in front of this part here. And we've made it more evident by using our darker color where it's underneath. So bringing that through. You can see that we've got movement happening as well to create that wavy effect. A good rule of thumb is any part of the hair that's popping away from the image, so out towards your sides of your paper, think of that as like a mountain. It's popping out. Our light rays come down and hit those mountains first, so they're generally lighter the whole way through that area. Then the opposite of that is the valley. So that's the part of the hair that's curving in toward the face. And because these are curving in and down, they get less light, so they appear darker. So mountains pop away from the face and are lighter. Valleys pop in toward the face and are darker. Always a really great way to think about that. And you can see that like clearly on the other side as well. So popping in toward the face, darker. Popping out away from the face, lighter. And that's how we create our wave shading. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to do my pencils first and then I'll pop in with markers. Alright, welcome to the pencils portion of the video tutorial. Make sure that you've watched the start of this video where I go through how we're going to tackle colouring this up, and then we'll go ahead and get started here. I'm going to start with those shadows that we talked about, beginning with chocolate. So moving her off to the side of the paper, it's really important that we take our time here to build up the blend slowly and softly so we have that control. So I'm not using much pressure at all here as I come into the side, applying my cast shadow under the hat and behind the hair. So usually the hair will fall over the face when it's down and long like this, so that often has the shadow around. You can see I've got a little bit of thickness to this color as well. It's not super duper fine. And I'm also coming here in between the petals as well to show where they are sitting over the face. Now while I've got this color, let's move into the other parts of the skin tone. So I've got the hand here. We're going to add shading to the part that's behind. Come up the side of the hand too, where it would be curving around and away from the light. You can even do a little bit of like the knuckle detail between the hands there as well. And if you'd like, you can even add like the little detail in the fingers too. That little knuckle, the joint detail. Cast it around the flower because that is sitting in front. You can even do a little bit around the nail as well. Coming in now into the arm over here, so add this color to the back where it's behind. It's always going to be a lot darker if there's a section that's behind everything else. Remember, we want to add color to both sides to show that it is rounding away from the light. Alright, other side here. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to bring that color down and around the bottom. Coming into the part of the hand that's behind, we definitely want that to be a lot darker so we can show the different levels. So I do all of that first. It just helps me to more clearly see those levels there. Then we can do a little bit of hand detail. Can do like the little knuckles as well. Okay, now we're going to come up and start to blend out. So the next color I'm going to be using is a little bit of burnt ochre. And all we do here is come back exactly over where we laid this first color and then start to extend a little further out. Make sure you're using small, soft strokes to do your blending. When our strokes are larger, it skips over the tooth of the paper, and that's why it's not really getting in there and flattening it, and that's why it can feel messy at times. Take your time, have a little patience as you color as well, and focus on all the details to help you stay in this present moment. Now with this color you can start to apply just a little bit to the underside of the fingers as well. So just show how that is curving around. Alright, next color is a little bit of peach. So now we're starting to move away from the browns and into more of those pinky bases. This is really important when you do skin tone. You don't tend to have either like a pinky base or a more yellowy base, but you want to make sure that you are including colors in those sort of ranges. Notice how far I'm extending the colors here as well. So we're really coming in toward those center points now, leaving my lightest color for my highlight only. Remember, we're going for more of an olive complexion here today. It's not meant to be super light. I know that can feel scary and like it's maybe a little wrong on the paper, just because it can feel like quite red or quite dark when we're not used to using those sort of colors. Even when you're coloring a fair complexion, it's the same thing. People always freak out at this point because they go, oh, it's so dark compared to what I'm expecting. This is normal. When you add all your hair and everything as well, it lifts the color, makes it look a lot lighter. But at the moment, keep in mind you're contrasting against the white of the paper, so it's always going to feel darker. And our next color is a little bit of light peach. Now again, bringing that through the previous. You may still have white speckles, that tooth showing through, that's okay. Bring it almost the whole way in. See, I've left just the tiniest little bit of white because I can use that to just help increase a little more contrast by coming in with my white pencil. So I bring the white through and I don't bring it all the way back. I'm just going over like the last color. See how that just lifts it that little bit? Right, let's do the same everywhere else. And then bring a little bit of white through the remaining areas just to lift. Alright, so that's one full round of the blend. So I've got quite a bit of tooth showing through. You can see we've got really nice depth though and dimension happening there. And we've got all of the contrast of color. So we want to go through and repeat everything again. Now you can use your blender if you'd prefer, but keep in mind that it can compromise the smoothness of the blend. So I would really recommend to make sure that you're 100% happy with the level of coverage and vibrancy before you use this. If it's not quite right, it's going to be really hard to come back over the top. So it's totally up to you which type of blending you'd like to do here, but let's repeat either with the blender or another coat to finish it up. Now before I finish up with the skin, let's just go into the nails. I've got a little bit of blush pink and I'm just applying in here. You can leave just a touch of white through the middle if you can for a little bit of contrast just so the color doesn't look flat, but it's such a small detail. Alright, now that's your skin tone all done. Now we're going to go ahead and color up the hair. Now with the hair we want to create texture, and the way that we're going to create that is by layering strokes on top of each other. So I'm going to start with a little bit of dark brown. Make sure your pencil's nice and sharp. Now I'm going to start at the top of the hair here. And you can see I'm just drawing a bit of a line like where the hat is. That's my shadow or my starting point. And then I'm going to extend my strokes down from here. Now if you want to create like little strands like this where I've got like, you see that little lighter part? All I've done there is two lines close together and I haven't shaded between them. I've shaded away. So you can see these lines are closer together, but these two here only have my lightest color between them. That creates a little strands like they're popping up. Of course, it's a lot less structured when you're coloring this though, because every person is going to color a little differently. So it's really, there's not a right or wrong way to tackle this and where your detail goes, but just play around with it. And you can play around with where you add the shading to create things like that. Now we can split up the hair into sections as well. So an example is down the bottom here where I've drawn these lines. Draw a thicker section to the left of that line, and essentially what we're doing is we're splitting the hair up here, showing that this section is behind because it has a shadow on it. Do a little bit of shading there and see how all of a sudden it looks like we've got two sections. You can even do the same here as well, where you've got this curve up from the bottom. Let's just trace that so we can create a whole section that runs down the side. So the only time your darker color runs through where your highlights would be is if you are doing like this, like a cast shadow. The rest of the time, your darker color will not come through your highlight area. I'm going to bring that up toward the top as well. So we've created a section like on that outside. Cast shadows are really important when we color hair, so think about anything else that's in front, like our sunflower over here. So I'm coming through and I'm just applying this color between the petals, showing how they're in front. Remember to always add shading to your shadows, so don't just keep them as lines. We always want a little bit of shading because our cast shadow should be thicker than the actual strokes of the hair as well. Come on, underneath our sunflower leaves here too. Alright, let's come back to the top and continue with our strokes. So we've got a little dip down here. Where the dip is, let's work on building up some strokes to come in this opposite direction here. And then come back down. So each stroke should always have a tip on it, like a point. In here we've got a clear valley where it's curving in. So let's add our strokes through that point as well. And you can see my strokes sort of curve with the shape of the hair too. All different lengths. And you can add them closer together in the very shadow area so you do have that more clear shading. Work your way down, and we've got another little dip over here as well. Okay, that's one side of the hair. Now let's go ahead and do the other side while we have this color out. So you're going to come down from the top. Come around your sunflower because that's sitting in front. It's casting that shadow back. And even you can come around the whole girl down the side because she's in front. You can create like a strand here that looks like it's sitting forward by drawing a line, a little cast shadow, and we'll just leave that whole area uncolored and add your shading inside. This section here being behind, let's add our shadow. And then we've got the two little curls at the bottom here. Alright, so that's the first layer all done. Now we're going to come in with the next colour and we're going to apply strokes over the top and extend a little further out. So the next colour is chocolate. Again, make sure your pencil's nice and sharp so you have the control on your strokes. And all I'm doing is I'm just starting at the top, coming over my strokes and extending a little further out. We don't want any strokes joining, so make sure that you're not joining up strokes through your highlight areas at this point. If you have space to add more strokes, you absolutely can as well, or you can stick with the ones you've already done. If your strokes are really big, you can add a few smaller strokes in between in your shadow areas to start to fill that space a little bit more with variation. Other side, same thing. Alright, next is a bit of burnt ochre. You can see each time now it's just the same thing. We come through on those strokes, we extend a little longer. If we have the space to add more and we want more texture, we can as well. But all you're basically doing is just following the same shapes that you've already laid down. From there, there's not really a right or wrong. You're just slowly filling in those spaces. Other side. So you can see we're starting to create those shapes. We're starting to get that shiny effect now as we extend through. We're still making sure that we're not joining up all those strokes in the highlight areas. Having that little pop of white, that contrast for the moment, helps the section stand out. So we're always just coming from each side, from the valleys, and blending toward the highlights. Alright, next color, goldenrod. So we're definitely getting lighter now as we get toward our highlight area. So with this beautiful dark brown blend, we're starting to inject more of like that caramel sort of look in our highlight. So now I start to extend a little further and I start to bring in toward those highlight areas. You're not covering everything though. Keep those little pops of white. It's going to help you to have contrast over your blend. So you're still spacing out your strokes, leaving the gaps between. Alright, now this last step is very important. This last step is all about making the strokes between your strokes, so there's gaps between your strokes, brighter and make them stand out so you have the texture. So the color I'm going to use for this is beige, and all I'm doing is I'm coming in that white space. Now I want this hair color to be darker, so I do often use white for this step, but because I'm going for like a darker hair color here, the beige will be a little bit richer in my highlights to make the value a little darker. So I'm basically just trying to come in between my strokes. You want to try and avoid going over the top of the strokes because this color is so light, it's just going to make the strokes look lighter and you may lose a little bit of the definition in your darker areas. So just take your time and you're essentially just doing strokes between. That's helping to flatten down some of the tooth as well and make those areas a little brighter. Same on the other side. I'm now going to grab my blender pencil and I'm just going to apply over the strokes. So not over the gaps between. I'm going to start on each stroke and extend down, and that's just going to help to flatten my tooth. If you don't have a blender, you can just repeat all of the steps again to build up that extra depth and start to flatten the tooth. Now at this point you can go ahead and repeat again still if you want more depth. I usually do go ahead and do it a second time. I am going to leave it there today, however. What you can do though, if you do want a little extra depth, a little tip, is to bring through just a touch of black in some of your very shadow areas. So this is just a really small amount and it's always optional, but you can see just by even doing this, it just adds so much more to these areas. It's such a small thing, but it just makes your shadows really stand out. I wouldn't do it on lighter hair. I'd pick something like a mid-brown to do that with rather than the black. But even you can see like coming around the shadows, you can just use this as like a little bit of extra detail, essentially, just making those shadows really stand out on the page. Of course, though, again, as I said, it is optional, but I did do that in my actual final image that I did as my sample too. So I wanted to show you what I did to make that pop a little bit more. And you can even come back with the other colors and repeat again to blend it out. So I'll show you that's this one here, but I did the second round in this one. So can you see the difference? At the moment that's 1, this is 2. See how that's a lot smoother and the colors come in together more? All that is exactly the same, but now I come back through the colors again. So I just go with dark brown, I work my way down to goldenrod. I'd probably skip the beige at the end, unless you really need to focus on some tooth and other areas, just because it does make the blend a lot lighter. But that is actually the skin and hair all complete. So again, a lot of techniques you can now take away and start applying to all different images. So once you start thinking about how you can apply this to different stamps and start to add this, you can revisit these techniques as well. Remember, we don't learn everything about a technique just by doing it with a video once. So throw on your video again, practice again with other images. We need to be reminded of the steps so we can start to have all of this information sink in and become second nature. So don't worry if you go to color an image after this class and you forget everything. It's normal. You've only done it this one time. And even if you've done a few classes, it's the same thing. You may need to go over the steps again, the cast shadow and the way we approach the techniques just a couple of times with the video or with your booklet to give yourself that little bit of a prompt, and then it's going to start becoming part of your regular routine. Remember, when you're viewing your work, you want to make sure that you step back from it. Don't just view it in that up close mode, because little things like maybe some of the angles of these are a little bit different. Those little things are not big in the scheme of it. When your piece is actually finished, your eye is going to be drawn to all the detail, and they're not going to notice tiny little things that you maybe weren't 100% happy with at this early point. So that's why it's really important that we continue on and we finish up to see how these techniques come together. If you are really struggling though, remember now is the time to ask for help. Use the free private tutoring that's available. It's there to help you grow. So don't be afraid to send your photos through and we can work on some tips for you. Now I'd love to see you be brave and share your work at this point, this halfway point. It's always a really good thing to actually share your work and to look at how you're talking about your work throughout the learning process. So this is some good art therapy tips for you right now. It's a really compulsive need to point out the things we don't like. It's like an inherent nature that we do this. We look for the worst. And unfortunately, the words that you use directly influence your confidence, your motivation, and your desire to keep going. So it's really important that we address how we actually talk about our work. And this includes when you're posting it. When you post online, you are not posting for anyone else. You're not posting for likes. You're not posting for comments. You are posting for you to acknowledge your growth. That's purely what it is. So it's really important when you're posting that you resist that urge to point out all the negatives. No one is judging your work. When you scroll through all the groups, are you sitting there pointing out every little mistake in everyone's work? Or when a friend shows you their work, do you go, well, that's nice, but you really messed up the sky there? No, you're focused on the positives. You're focused on the points that catch your eye the most. And that's what's important for you to do with your work. So when you share, which I want you to do, I want you to be brave and I want you to put it out there because it's you celebrating your growth. I want you to point out 2 things you feel that you've done well or you've learned in this lesson. No negatives. When it comes to critiquing your work, this should always be done privately. You can do this yourself or you can do this with me and we can work on those tips together. But instead of saying things like, I don't like the sky or I messed up the blending over here, what we want to do is we want to change our speech. So we want to say, next time I'm going to try this to get this result. Notice that all of a sudden you've taken out the negatives. There's no I don't like, no hate, no mistake. There's no negative words that are used. You're actually purely focused on the lesson that you're taking away. This is where the growth is. So there's a difference between pointing out everything that's wrong and telling yourself it's not good enough, or pointing out what you can do to grow. So it's really important that your mindset is focused on this, because sometimes I have people say, well, me, when I tell myself everything I've done wrong, it helps me learn. It does, but it really doesn't at the same time. It's a demotivator. The way that we word that can actually help propel you forward always. And it helps to also break down those barriers of perfection. Because when people say, yeah, but telling myself what I've done wrong helps me learn, that can actually come from a perfectionism disorder. You're trying so hard to get it perfect that you're telling yourself what's wrong so you can continue to be perfect. So instead, I want you to break that down today. There isn't right and there isn't wrong. There is simply growth. So this is your lesson, your big lesson I want you to take away from this class, and why I want you to share your work. Because I want you to start believing it is about growth and not about whether you're good enough or not good enough today. Because everything you're doing is that growth. It's that progression. It's helping you level up. So I want you to give yourself a big pat on the back right now, because you've learned a whole lot of new techniques already, and we've only just done chapter 2. You've already leveled up. Even if you've done years of classes, you're focusing on refinement. And that's really, really important. Once you learn technique, you then learn to refine. And this may be where you're at now. You're always looking to level up, to challenge, to grow. So I'm looking forward to seeing your practice at this point. And remember, even if you are feeling really down about it, you've got to reach out privately. We've got to take those steps together and help you get back on that path of growth. Alright, let's jump in with the markers portion of this video tutorial. Again, make sure that you've watched the start of this video for all of the foundations for how we're going to be colouring up the skin and the hair. Just going to pop this off to the side. We're starting with E15 here in the skin. So we're working with more of an olive complexion. I'm going to apply as a cast shadow underneath the hat and into the sides of the face as well, applying behind the hair which is sitting in front. Also going to come around the little petals there that are in front of the face. Now, don't be afraid to have a little bit of thickness on this. I find people tend to make the shadows for the skin very fine, but it makes them harder to blend out. So next color I'm going to use is a little bit of E13, and we're going to come straight over the top. Multiple strokes to blend out the line of the color underneath. And then continue on into that middle area. Then I've got my E11. And again, straight over the top, multiple strokes. Work on getting it smooth. Notice how small a space I have left for my highlight. So this color is probably more the main color right now. And then E00 coming through that remaining highlight area. Quite lighter, so you still have that contrast between light and shade. And again, you can absolutely repeat if you want a little bit of extra depth or more smoother blending. Let's come down now to the next part. So we've got the hand here. Now the parts of the hand that are clearly behind, we're going to use the E15 and apply some pretty thick shadows through there. Come up the opposite side over here, add a little bit of shading where the hand would be curving around. You can see I'm also doing like a little bit of a knuckle detail as well. Now down to the rest of the arm here, I'm applying in that crease and to the part of the arm that is further back. Around the side. Cast shadow under the leaf. Our other side of the hand here, same thing. E15 to the parts that are much further back. Add a little bit of detail, like into the knuckles, between the fingers. I'm going to come around the bottom of the arm as well. Now remember, the arms are like cylinders, so the middle usually popping out toward us, so we have shading to both sides, showing that it's rounded. Alright, time to blend out, and I'm going to use E13. So we're going to come straight over the top and extend a little further. And start to apply on the parts of the fingers that are toward the bottom as well. Starting to show that rounding on both sides. E11. You can do a little bit of knuckle detail here as well. I like to do this little lighter color rather than doing the knuckles too dark, because it can stand out a bit too much. So you don't do it with the very lightest color, but you do it with sort of that mid color. E00 is next. Bringing that in towards your highlight. And that's the skin tone there, all done. Now you can repeat again if you want that little bit of extra depth, totally up to you as well. Alright, now we're going to move on to the hair. So I'm going to start with a little bit of E49. So we already talked about how we're going to place the shading. Now I just want to talk about the stroke really quickly. So again, we hold the marker nice and close to that nib, resting on my second last finger, and I want to hold the marker upright this time because I'm aiming to work on that very, very tip of the marker. The idea here is the same thing, we're just grazing along the surface of the paper just to get that fine stroke. Now, if you're using a bullet tip, the technique is no different. I've got a Spectrum Noir here. Same thing. Hold upright, working on the tip, and you can see my strokes are no bigger. I know it's a very light color, but hopefully you can see it's exactly the same in size. It just comes down to the control over the marker. And just take a little time. Just make sure you're not pushing into the page to draw the strokes. We just want to touch the tip of the nib. It's very light. Speed yourself up if you find that you're pushing down and taking your time thinking about the strokes. I'd rather it be messy and soft because you can always refine messiness. So let's start at the top, so applying where that hat is. You can also apply a cast shadow around like the flowers, the leaves, anything that's overlapping with the hair as well. You can also break the head down into sections. So you can see here the line that I've drawn. Let's add a nice thick cast shadow behind that, showing two different sections. And even with this one here, like you can extend this around and draw in a section that extends to the top of the hair as well. So you're essentially breaking it down. So instead of one big mass, you've got smaller parts, and each of those parts have that highlight, midtone, and shadow. Now from the top, extend your strokes down. What's really key here that you'll notice I'm doing is I'm leaving a gap between the strokes. That is 100% the main thing to focus on. It doesn't matter how thick your strokes are, it's the gaps between your strokes that make texture. I cannot emphasize that enough. I will always get people say, oh, my strokes are so thick and I don't have the texture. And it's not that their strokes were thick, it's that they went like this. Can you see there's no gap there? There isn't texture because the strokes are thick. There's no texture because there's no gaps. So we want this. We want individual spaces. The spaces help us see that as lines, not blending. That is your biggest takeaway for doing textures like hair. And then from here, we come back in this other direction and we do our strokes extending up toward the other valley. So don't worry about how thick those strokes are, just worry about the spaces between them. We want to try and get the nice point on both sides. So as I come back down now toward the other highlight, I'm going to do little strokes here on this side too. Again, still spacing everything out. My strokes are all different lengths as well for variation. And I'm going to apply in the next valley. So you can see we've got a valley here. So I'm going to start to curve these strokes around and fill in the space to create the shadows. And I've got another highlight here, a valley over here. So our strokes are going to come through this part. And you can curve them the other way as well. Alright, we can do this one side of the hair first. So with this, we can now move into the next color, which is going to be E37. So with the E37, all we do is we just follow the same direction of our strokes. I don't really even worry about what the strokes were underneath. I'm just starting in the shadow area, extending my strokes so they're a little longer. If I've got space to add new strokes, I can absolutely do so. I'm just making sure each stroke is a slightly different length, so I have that variation happening there. Don't worry if it feels a little messy at the halfway point, it's absolutely normal. Just keep working on building those strokes up and make sure that you're always separating those strokes with each color that you use. Next lot of hair, keep going down. Next color is my YR27. And it's the same thing, it's following those basic shapes around. Still space out those strokes. We're getting closer in toward those highlight areas now. And then my YR24. Now this is my highlight color, and it's important to remember as I use this color, I'm not trying to cover all of the space. I'm still spacing out my strokes, leaving gaps between them. This will naturally leave some very, very small little areas of white between my strokes, which helps to create more of that texture. Alright, now that's one round of the blend. Now we definitely want to come through and repeat again. My darkest color is still holding a lot of depth though, so I'm not going to repeat the E49. I'm just going to start from E37. And I just start in my shadow areas and then just extend my strokes a little further out where I did the first time around. Just building up a little bit of extra depth. We're able to build a bit more of the space if we need it and control how dark that blend becomes as well. Of course, if you're happy with where it is, you don't have to do extra layers. It's always up to you how you're feeling about the blend. This is a little bit of a trickier blend because it's more of like that really deep coppery caramel sort of color, and the first time around I find it often looks a bit white, a bit golden. The second round you're injecting more of that sort of chocolate tone over the top, so it tones it down a little bit, but then you still have the hint of all those golds underneath. See how much richer it's starting to look now? Next color, YR27. We always start in the shadow area. So see how the shadow is quite dense? We're avoiding little lighter speckles through those areas. So we keep the depth, we keep the dimension there. There's nothing distracting from the highlight. Lightest color through that highlight area. Alright, now my last color is YR24. Again, straight over the top and blending a little further out. Leave those gaps between, not just blending over everything. We're creating our strokes. So beautiful rich color. You can see the movement just based on where I've added those darker colors there. We have definite waves. Let's do the other side as well. So I'm going to start with E49, cast shadows first, come around that section of hair that's in front, come around the flower, And I've got the two little sections at the bottom as well. Gonna do some little strokes in each of those. Now, say you want to create like a little raised section, what you can do is you can grab your marker and sort of draw in like a line here, and then if we leave all of this light, then that's going to look like it's popping forward. So let's do our shadows on the inside of that line, and you can see just by changing where we do our shading, we're able to create areas that look raised up and areas that look lowered down. Alright, next color, E37. Let's come over the top and extend a little further. YR27. And YR24. What I like about this step is you've got one side with 2 layers and one side with 1 layer. And now you should be able to pretty clearly see between the two the difference in the depth. So let's go ahead and repeat again. I'm going to leave out the E49 and just start from E37. And that's my skin and hair all done. So again, a lot of techniques you can now take away and start applying to all different images. So once you start thinking about how you can apply this to different stamps and start to add this, you can revisit these techniques as well. Remember, we don't learn everything about a technique just by doing it with a video once. So throw on your video again, practice again with other images. We need to be reminded of the steps so we can start to have all of this information sink in and become second nature. So don't worry if you go to color an image after this class and you forget everything. It's normal. You've only done it this one time. And even if you've done a few classes, it's the same thing. You may need to go over the steps again, the cast shadow and the way we approach the techniques just a couple of times with the video or with your booklet to give yourself that little bit of a prompt, and then it's going to start becoming part of your regular routine. Remember, when you're viewing your work, you want to make sure that you step back from it. Don't just view it in the up close mode, because little things like maybe some of the angles of these are a little bit different. Those little things are not big in the scheme of it. When your piece is actually finished, your eye is going to be drawn to all the detail, and they're not going to notice tiny little things that you maybe weren't 100% happy with at this early point. So that's why it's really important that we continue on and we finish up to see how these techniques come together. If you are really struggling though, remember now is the time to ask for help. Use the free private tutoring that's available. It's there to help you grow. So don't be afraid to send your photos through and we can work on some tips for you. Now, I'd love to see you be brave and share your work at this point, this halfway point. It's always a really good thing to actually share your work and to look at how you're talking about your work throughout the learning process. So this is some good art therapy tips for you right now. It's a really compulsive need to point out the things we don't like. It's like an inherent nature that we do this. We look for the worst. And unfortunately, the words that you use directly influence your confidence, your motivation, and your desire to keep going. So it's really important that we address how we actually talk about our work. And this includes when you're posting it. When you post online, you are not posting for anyone else. You're not posting for likes. You're not posting for comments. You are posting for you to acknowledge your growth. That's purely what it is. So it's really important when you're posting that you resist that urge to point out all the negatives. No one is judging your work. When you scroll through all the groups, are you sitting there pointing out every little mistake in everyone's work? Or when a friend shows you their work, do you go, well, that's nice, but you really messed up the sky there? No, you're focused on the positives. You're focused on the points that catch your eye the most. And that's what's important for you to do with your work. So when you share, which I want you to do, I want you to be brave and I want you to put it out there because it's you celebrating your growth. I want you to point out 2 things you feel that you've done well or you've learned in this lesson. No negatives. When it comes to critiquing your work, this should always be done privately. You can do this yourself or you can do this with me and we can work on those tips together. But instead of saying things like, I don't like the sky or I messed up the blending over here, what we want to do is we want to change our speech. So we want to say, next time I'm going to try this to get this result. Notice that all of a sudden you've taken out the negatives. There's no I don't like, no hate, no mistake. There's no negative words that are used. You're actually purely focused on the lesson that you're taking away. This is where the growth is. So there's a difference between pointing out everything that's wrong and telling yourself it's not good enough, or pointing out what you can do to grow. So it's really important that your mindset is focused on this, because sometimes I have people say, well, me, when I tell myself everything I've done wrong, it helps me learn. It does, but it really doesn't at the same time. It's a demotivator. The way that we word that can actually help propel you forward always. And it helps to also break down those barriers of perfection. Because when people say, yeah, but telling myself what I've done wrong helps me learn, that can actually come from a perfectionism disorder. You're trying so hard to get it perfect that you're telling yourself what's wrong so you can continue to be perfect. So instead, I want you to break that down today. There isn't right and there isn't wrong. There is simply growth. So this is your lesson, your big lesson I want you to take away from this class, and why I want you to share your work. Because I want you to start believing it is about growth and not about whether you're good enough or not good enough today. Because everything you're doing is that growth. It's that progression. It's helping you level up. So I want you to give yourself a big pat on the back right now, because you've learned a whole lot of new techniques already and we've only just done chapter 2. You've already leveled up. Even if you've done years of classes, you're focusing on refinement. And that's really, really important. Once you learn technique, you then learn to refine. And this may be where you're at now. You're always looking to level up, to challenge, to grow. So I'm looking forward to seeing your practice at this point. And remember, even if you are feeling really down about it, you've got to reach out privately. We've got to take those steps together and help you get back on that path of growth. Welcome to the last chapter of the video tutorial, and now we're going to be looking at the girl's outfit. So you can see here we have a really pretty soft blue, keeping in mind all of the foundations that we've already been talking about. So we've got cast shadows around like the arms and the flower as they're sitting over the outfit there. We've got a few folds that we're drawing in, so we're not going to get very heavy on folds theory today. We've got a lot of classes that focus on this, but I've just added a few basics there for interest. Folds will usually emanate from what is a tension point, so that's where the fabric is pulled tight. So areas like the shoulders, the arms, if they're sitting on the outfit, like if they're tucked in tight to her body, that's going to create folds as well. So that's why you'll see all of the folds are sort of falling from this top area. I do have a little bit of like a ruffle coming in on the angle here. We've got a larger portion of fabric, so this is kind of suggesting that the fabric is quite loose and it's got a little bit of a bunch or an indent at that point. You'll notice in the sleeves we've got this part here in front and then it curves around and we're seeing the back of the fabric here. So the back being a little darker to show this. Folds which are emanating from where the ruffled sleeve is sewn to the rest of the sleeve here. So we've got the folds coming down. Wherever it's lighter, it'll appear raised up. And wherever we've got these little darker pockets, it's going to look like it's lower down or creases, or that we have like overlapping fabric. So it comes up and overlaps to create that cast shadow. Again, you can use the outline here to inform what's happening on the interior. So when we have these little dips in toward the middle, think of that outline as being pulled in. So we'd have to draw in that fold to explain why we've got those dips in the outline. When it comes to the hat, you can see nice and dark closer in toward our character here. We've got a few little folds here showing where the fabric is kind of bunched up, and you can tell we've got those lighter parts before it gets darker. So it's definitely showing like a raised sort of ridge, and the darker areas like the crease or where the fabric is pushed in tight. Lighter around the very edge here, showing how that's kind of flicking out, catching the light. And then you can see we've created this texture over the top. And that's helping to show that it's not a flat surface or material. We do have that texture through it. So always think about what it is you're coloring up and what are the typical textures that you would usually use. So we don't always have to approach everything with just flat colors. We can start to implement textures and patterns and everything over the top. The easiest way to do that is to do all of your shading first and then to come back and add that texture or pattern. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump on in. Alright, welcome to the pencils portion of the video tutorial. Please make sure you've watched the start of the video where we're going through some of those theories, and then we'll go ahead and jump right in. So to make it nice and easy for us here, I'm going to start with denim blue, our darkest color in the blend, and I'm going to softly apply to create my cast shadows in the outfit here. So I'm coming around the girl. And when we color repetitive objects, it's really important to practice patience. Now, it might sound funny to hear that, but repetitive objects in our coloring is often when we start to get impatient. We feel like we have to rush, our mind starts to wander a little bit. That's when some stress or anxiety can seep through. We start thinking about everything else going on. It's really important when you do a repetitive task to bring your mind back to what you're working on. This is called practicing mindfulness. So you may have heard of mindfulness before. Mindfulness is when we are in the present moment. So we're not thinking of all the worries that go on around us. We're not stressing about the past or the future, what's on our to-do list, if we're unwell or family is unwell or anything like that. It's a chance to switch off. You're focusing directly on the here and now, which gives your mind a mental break, gives your body a chance to reset, and helps you feel more balanced and de-stressed. I find that when people are really overwhelmed, the last thing they tend to do is take time for themselves. And this leads to so much stress, and even then, that also translates into our body. So you also have physical effects of stress as well. Remember that coloring is not about coloring and doing a hobby. Hobbies are actually about taking time out for you to allow everything to reset. So you never have to feel guilty or selfish for taking time for things like this, because it's actually helping you be in the best mind frame, be in your best physical health. So it is really, really important to remember that you're doing coloring for you, not because coloring is important. It's because you are important. So when we practice this, get the most out of it. Try and switch off from everything. And when you are coloring, you can do that by focusing on the colors, focusing on how smooth your blend is. Focus on where's that light source coming from? How much pressure am I placing on the pencil? If you can remember these little things, it can help you to refocus your mind and focus on this task that's ahead of you, so you do get the full benefit. Even writing some of these keywords down on the page can help. So you might write down like pressure, color, blend. And as soon as you start feeling that stress come up, look at those words and be like, okay, these are my prompts. This is what I need to be focusing on just to take a break. And remember, at the end of the day, 10 minutes is better than no minutes. If you're flat out so busy or so overwhelmed, even if you take 10 minutes for you, that can be enough to help you feel more in control and a lot better to deal with everything that's going on. So the next time you feel really overwhelmed or really stressed with work or something like that, actually say to yourself, okay, this stress means that I do need to stop right now. I need to stop. I need to take time for me, even if it's just 10 minutes, just to focus on something else. And I guarantee it will really help and you'll see a lot of benefit. We often get a lot of people, sadly, who will leave the classes and say they don't have time, things are so busy, they just want to watch TV or relax when they get home. And then I always hear from them 6 months later and they say, well, my doctors told me I need to do something like this. So I'm back because now I'm told that I have to do these things to help me take time out, to help me focus on myself and to recharge. Because burnout's such a real thing, and we always think we have to be go, go, go as well. Or we think we just have to sit and relax or do the chores around the house and things like that. And that can all really build up too, because it's time not being productive for you. We need that time definitely to relax and recharge, but we do need the time to spend on ourselves as well. Now, in the main part of the outfit, I'm going to do a few fold lines just extending down. So I'm just going to bring them out. The ones facing toward the left, I'm going to blend out toward that left area. All right, now I'm going to move into a little bit of light cerulean blue. And we're just going to pop in straight over the top and extend that little further out. So once you've got your placement of colors, it's nice and easy. And we can just blend out using our basic blending method. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not getting really into a lot of the theories here with folds. It's quite a complicated topic and requires quite a lot of theory. So we do go into this in a lot of detail in our other classes as well for you, if you would like to learn more. And we do tackle this often in our monthly classes. So our monthly classes are really great if you want to learn more about coloring, because you're trying all different topics and techniques. So this is how people will usually grow the quickest, because they're always trying things outside of that usual comfort zone. So it's getting you to try these techniques to level up and to take on those challenges. So really, really great if you want to level up your skills quickly. Try not to pick and choose topics when you're wanting to learn more. You'll always learn more from the things that aren't your usual go-to style, colors, or overall topic as well. So if you usually do color flowers, it's time to color up animals or some objects, something a little different. Even if you only intend on coloring flowers in the future, trying the things that push you a little bit when you're learning just really help to increase your skill set. Right, next color is sky blue light, and we're just doing the same thing. Straight over the top, extending a little further out. Don't cover all of the area. We want to keep this blend fairly light. So I'm leaving space for my white to come in last, and we can tint the color, making it appear a little bit more pastel and soft. Alright, now through this remaining area, grab your white pencil, come through the remaining white area, and blend out toward the blue. Now with the final step of the outfit, you can repeat again, or you can use your blender pencil. And our aim here is just to flatten and get everything smooth. Now remember, if you are using the blender, you do have to make sure that the pigment has built up to the level of vibrancy you'd like it. Because once you've used the blender, you're flattening down the tooth, it's harder to add more pigment. And we need to make sure that there's enough there that we don't get that sort of scratchy effect at the end. Alright, that's our shirt all done. Now, yours may be a little bit darker or a little lighter than mine as well. Just remember, either way, it's not wrong. It just, how much of each color we've used impacts how bright the end result is. And it's absolutely okay if it's just a little different. It just means that we've just adjusted the amount of each color used. Alright, now let's come into the hat. I'm going to start with a little bit of burnt ochre. Let's pop in and around the side here, building up our shadows underneath. Come under the head and we'll do the same thing. So remember we talked about at the start, we're creating like that ruched or the flattened fabric sort of look here. That's why we're creating these multiple fold lines. Now in these folds which are close to the face, I just want to darken them just a little more. So I'm going to bring through a little bit of chocolate and I'm just going to darken right where it's closest to like the hair. Just so we can more clearly see that shadow area. Okay. From here, I'm going to come into this top section, cast shadow around the brim of the hat there, and then I'm going to apply shading into the sides. The sides are curving around and away from the light. Now I'm also going to come in on this edge. You can see like the little details. I'm just going to apply to the bottom side of each of these like little wrinkly lines. So it's just creating a bit of definition where the fabric is all bunching here as well. Showing like those little creases. Always apply to the side facing the bottom. Alright, time to blend that out. I'm going to use a little bit of goldenrod. Just come straight over the top and extend a little further out. Applying to the lower side here. Next color is a little bit of my jasmine. And we continue to blend out with the jasmine as well. You can see we're blending out but leaving like that brim a little lighter. Blend out these edges as well. It can be a little messy, it doesn't need to be perfect. We're trying to encourage a little texture anyway through this area. And then I'm going to come through the brim, but I'm kind of coming through the middle. So I want the sides to look like they're lighter and more raised up. And same on this side, though the area is a little smaller. Now the color I'm using next is cream. So definitely like blending out now toward those highlights. And you can even grab your white pencil and bring this through the remaining area. So if we're ever going to use like the blender to flatten, which is what we're going to do here to try and get some texture, we do want to try and apply the white rather than just leaving it white in areas, because that's going to be able to be pushed around as well. So you're adding more pigment, which enables the easier push. So try not to just leave areas white, always add in the pigment. Okay, now once you've done that, you can repeat or you can use your blender. And we're just going to aim to flatten everything down. Start in your shadow area, blend toward that highlight. Once you're happy with the level of depth, we go through with our burnt ochre and just softly apply some lines. Now you can see some of the lines have already been drawn in, so we can use this as a guide to get started, and then we can continue some of them down the main portion of the hat. Now it's meant to be a little messy, so don't take your time trying to space out everything and have it all perfect. We want a little bit of that random messy texture. And then we're going to come the opposite way and do these lines, spacing everything out this way. So you can see we have that little rattan sort of texture there. And let's do the same on this side. Again, don't worry about how neat it is. Just work through quickly creating this texture on top. And then you can come back in that opposite direction. You can go over any of the extra details if you want, like along these side edges. It's totally up to you how detailed you want that to look or how soft you want it to look. And I'm going to do the detail in the side area as well. Now, one thing I like to do just to finish it off is to grab a white gel pen, and you can actually apply this between your strokes. So you can just come through like in between each of these squares. And this can really help with that texture effect as well. So I come in both directions. It's only light, but it just adds a little bit more of that texture. Now on pencil, gel pen doesn't always work the best. Every so often, scribble out on some scrap cardstock just to get it working again, because it gets a little clogged by the wax. Alright, and if I zoom out, that is actually my girl all finished up. So we've gone through such a big variety of techniques in this class, and again, very reusable techniques that you can use on all different images. Think about how you can reuse the skin, the hair, the outfit, the flowers. Throw on this video again the next time you're going to be coloring up a different image. Remind yourself of the steps and the way we approach light source and color to help these techniques start to sink in. Remember, coloring takes time and practice to learn, so your results may not instantly be the same as mine or others that you see may be doing this tutorial, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. Even if you don't love the result or you feel you've made a mistake, this is a lesson to learn from and you've grown today, so give yourself a pat on the back for taking that next step. If you'd like to learn more about coloring with me, please head to my website, kitandclouder.com, to view all of our coloring classes. You'll find freebies on the homepage, and also under the color blend charts, you'll find helpful resources for markers, pencils, and frequently asked coloring questions that have been answered for you as well. I always break down the very basics in class just like I've done here today. So even if a class looks tricky, you can be assured that we'll be taking it through step by step from the very beginner basics to help you start leveling up. But don't forget, a challenge is a great thing. We always want to be pushed a little when we're ready to learn more in our hobbies. And I'm always available with free one-on-one private tutoring if you'd like extra tips on your work or you'd like some assistance with leveling up if you don't feel like things are quite falling into place for you at the moment. I really hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Please feel free to share it around. I'd love your help to spread the word if you found it helpful on your blogs, on Facebook, on Instagram, anywhere that you may be able to get other people feeling encouraged to jump in. And if you ever see anyone asking in other groups where to learn to color, please consider sending them my way as well so we can continue to do fun things like this together in the future. I really hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see your coloring. Alright, welcome to the markers portion of the video tutorial. Please make sure that you've watched the start of this video for all the tips on how we're going to be doing the colouring. Then let's go ahead and get ready to jump in. So I'm starting with B24. Let's jump in and do our cast shadow around the girl. She's in front of our outfit here. We're going to have that nice cast shadow straight underneath. Remember, you want a bit of thickness to your cast shadows as well. It's always easier to blend out. Coming into the sleeve, I'm going to apply the shadow heavily to the part that's behind, and then we can go add in a little bit of our detail as well. Got like a little bit of ruching detail there. And now we're going to do a few details through the main area of the outfit. So folds just extending down, they're facing the left, we'll blend them out toward the left as well. So you can see I'm drawing in my line, doesn't need to be super fine, but then I'm thickening it up toward the side it's facing. I'll do another one through here as well. Now through this middle one here, I'm going to do just a little bit of an angled one, just to show that excess fabric. Okay, now time to blend out. Beat 23 is next. And then we're literally just going straight over the top and extending further out. So once you've laid in all of your shadows and everything, it's easy. You're just doing a basic blend like we've been doing throughout the rest of the class. Now I'm not getting very detailed on the folds here today, just because we've got a lot of classes that focus on folds as well. If you'd like to learn more about them, this is just a nice basic image. I'm just doing a few basic details so it's not plain through the center area. Come down to the sleeves, continue to blend. B21 is next. You'll be covering most of the area as you get up high here, and then as we do the folds, we'll just leave the very highlights for our lightest color. Make sure you do multiple strokes as you blend out this color so we can get it smooth as well. But you can always come back and repeat everything if you feel it needs it after you've done this step too. Okay, B000 is next, and this is our final color. So I'm just blending toward that highlight area. And even just before I hit the next fold, I'm just leaving a touch of white just so I can make those folds really pop and increasing that contrast like we've been talking about throughout the class as well. So that's the outfit. You can always come back and repeat again for that extra depth too. I'm going to pop up and do the hat now. We're going to use some YR colors here. I've got a little bit of YR27. And I'm going to come nice and close to the girl's head, adding in a bit of this color as a shadow and also along the top. So we're talking about like that crumpled fabric in there. That's why we've got these multiple folds starting to happen. Come above that brim there on the part behind, add a bit of shading into the sides. That's where it's curving away from the light. And I also like to come down the bottom side of the detail in the brim here. So we've got that little bit of texture, and by coming down one side of this, I'm just making that texture a little bit more prominent. So your blending here doesn't need to be super duper smooth. A little bit of texture is just going to enhance that look even further for us. Alright, the next color I'm going to be using is a little bit of YR24. Now I'm not extending these colors too far because I do want them to be quite a light blend. So as you're doing your shading here, think about just blending out the line of the color underneath rather than like filling the space. It's more to help us get a soft, smooth blend rather than it being that color. So each color here is just stepping down a very, very small amount. YR21 is next, and the same thing, only bring this out a short way. I'm not bringing it out very far, keeping these colors to my shadow areas. That way I'll be able to get more contrast between the hat and the hair as well. I'm going to add a little bit of blending out to each of these detail lines down the sides. I'm just dabbing straight over the top and starting to extend a little further out. Now the next colors are going to be a little less yellow. We're going to be using my E53 and my E50. So these are a bit more creamy based. So as I blend out, I'm just doing the exact same thing, but you can see they can take a little bit of that vibrancy away. So make sure you come back over the previous as well. So we're just starting to mute that down a little bit. Now, as I do this color, I'm going to come into the side of the hat and add a little bit of shading, but I'm leaving white above and below. So just starting to round out and add detail to the brim there. You can also blend out these little detail lines again into the side. And then my final color is E50. So again, over the top of the previous, and now bring this color through your highlight area. This color is quite soft, and so after using the two E50 colors, we should have lost a bit of that sort of yellowness to the blend, but we've still got all that beautiful depth in our shadow areas. Now I do want a little bit of texture all over, and the color I'm going to be using for this is actually a little bit of E35. So coming into more of our mid-browns rather than like that orangey tone. And all I'm going to do here is a few strokes coming up on the angle. You can see the artist has already drawn a few, so I'm using them to start us off. Allow it to be messy. We want it to look natural, not thought out. And then we can come in the opposite direction. So you can do these like all different lengths, like it doesn't need to properly fill the space. It's just creating that messy sort of texture so we can see that it's not flat. Now when I've finished that, what I like to do as a last step is I grab a white gel or paint pan and I just pop in straight in between these squares that I've created. And again, this is just helping to enhance that texture a little bit more. So come through both sides. It's only subtle, but when you look at it, you'll see a bit more texture than if we were to leave it out. Just helps to lift it a little bit more and creates more of like that straw hat feeling. So using your white gel pen for some textures is always a really great idea to enhance as well. Alright, now if I zoom out, that is actually my girl all finished up there today. So we've gone through such a big variety of techniques in this class, and again, very reusable techniques that you can use on all different images. Think about how you can reuse the skin, the hair, the outfit, the flowers. Throw on this video again the next time you're going to be coloring up a different image. Remind yourself of the steps and the way we approach light source and color to help these techniques start to sink in. Remember, coloring takes time and practice to learn, so your results may not instantly be the same as mine or others that you see may be doing this tutorial, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. Even if you don't love the result or you feel you've made a mistake, this is a lesson to learn from and you've grown today, so give yourself a pat on the back for taking that next step. If you'd like to learn more about colouring with me, please head to my website, kitandclouder.com, to view all of our colouring classes. You'll find freebies on the homepage, and also under the colour blend charts, you'll find helpful resources for markers, pencils, and frequently asked colouring questions that have been answered for you as well. I always break down the very basics in class, just like I've done here today. So even if a class looks tricky, you can be assured that we'll be taking it through step by step from the very beginner basics to help you start leveling up. But don't forget, a challenge is a great thing. We always want to be pushed a little when we're ready to learn more in our hobbies. And I'm always available with free one-on-one private tutoring if you'd like extra tips on your work, or you'd like some assistance with leveling up if you don't feel like things are quite falling into place for you at the moment. I really hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Please feel free to share it around. I'd love your help to spread the word if you found it helpful on your blogs, on Facebook, on Instagram, anywhere that you may be able to get other people feeling encouraged to jump in. And if you ever see anyone asking in other groups where to learn to colour, please consider sending them my way as well so we can continue to do fun things like this together in the future. I really hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see your colouring.